good to see that there's some hardcore here who've stuck to the end. So we're going to try to finish this with some good thoughts. I like going last or near to last. I don't know why, but I think it's an honor, to be honest with you, so I've always seen it that way. Speaking of honors, it's an honor to be here. What we've done, what we're doing here today, is not being done anywhere else that I'm aware of. We take this for granted, you know? Everybody just come to Pendleton Hall and hear a bunch of people spout off about science and religion, Swedenborgian science and religion, at a depth that we've heard today that you'd never hear anywhere else. We just take it for granted, just another Saturday in Brynathan. This is wonderful stuff. Let's don't forget that. So, we won't. Now, what's that? Yeah, you can read about it, yes. So, again, I just want to point out that if it weren't for Ron Horvath, we would be doing stuff, but we probably wouldn't be doing this. We got to remember that. Go to that URL that I gave you. Just a 10-minute talk that he gave 6 years ago. Tells you a lot about himself, which I think you need to know, and why we're doing this. So, again, I'm going to do this thing. They call this a lecture. Yeah. Oh, with a handout. Hold on here. I got to find the handout. No, this is a new one. Here you go. Andy, would you help me, please? Okay, now this is not essential, but, you know, I'm an old college professor. There you go. Just hand them out. You got to have a handout if you're going to do a lecture. And I don't mean to denigrate PowerPoint. I do use it some when I have a lot of pictures to show, but I don't today. I'm just going to talk, so I hope I can keep you awake. So anyway, the abstract, I gave you an abstract. It's in that handout. It's called Intelligent Default 2.0. All right, in 2019, not all that long ago, I wrote a book by that name, Intelligent Default. You can buy one right outside. All right? It's about theistic evolution. I've been interested in evolution since I was a kid in high school. Took biology. There was something fascinating about it to me, and it's always been that way. And then I went into college and majored in zoology, and one of my favorite things was evolution, evolutionary theory. Got a master's degree in the same place. What? Zoology. Why? I loved the idea of evolution, although we always knew back then that it was about half wrong, but we didn't mind because it was about half right, and it was very elegant. So we loved it. So in this book that I wrote, I was using the latest. I want to say something else about Angela. Her presentation was so wonderful, I can't believe it. I wish I could be half as calm as you, Angela, when you gave your presentation. I can't be calm. It's just, I can't do it. But I so much appreciated yours, and it was great. Okay, so Intelligent Default 2.0. I wrote a book by that name, Evolution, Love Evolution. And in that book, I attempted to explain how spiritual forms might enter into nature and come into correspondence with natural forms. Okay? That's been my fascination forever. Okay? Here's some of what I had to say. Just some of what I had to say in that book. A quick summary. There are two and only two possibilities for doing science. Science is not a thing, it's something you do, okay? There's only two ways. These are axioms from which our science starts, okay? Now axioms, I love axioms. They are self-evident premises, statements of apparent fact, which cannot be reduced, they're never questioned, and usually they can't even be proven. And we build whole universes on these things. Imagine that. Building a universe on something that we just think sounds pretty good, but we really can't prove. That's an axiom. Now here's axiom number one for science. In the beginning, there was nothing, and then it exploded. Okay, get that? The post-Enlightenment universe has been built on this anti-rational soap bubble ever since. This is not a bumper sticker. Supposedly intelligent people are selling this magical idea to this very day. They believe it. Why? It's an axiom. It's got to be true. Here's axiom number two. In the beginning, God caused the universe to flow into being from the spiritual sun and then proceeded to unfold it into the natural world in an orderly manner forever. I like that axiom. It's mine, okay? I didn't make it up, but it's the axiom, okay? I choose that axiom. Swedenborg chose that axiom. So I think I'm in pretty good company. Now, what is this theistic axiom kind of unfolded a little bit? Well, first, we believe that nature isn't from nature. It's from somewhere else, okay? We believe that there is a spiritual origin to all natural things. We've been hearing about that all day. We believe that science is a good and powerful thing. Nothing wrong with science. It's a thing we do. It's a wonderful thing. And then we believe that Swedenborg's writings, from the scientific all the way through the theological, can shed light on how spiritual natural interaction works. We believe that. And that's our axiom. And I think you've heard from people today that work from that axiom. So I want to say something about intelligent design. Here's where I've been terribly misunderstood in the past. One guy even wrote me a nasty letter about it. But he misunderstood me. Intelligent design, science, is really, really good. Those people do really good science. They are good scientists, okay? But assuming that nature is designed, these really good scientists can't tell us how it is designed. That's always bothered me. Not that they can't tell us even a little bit about it. See, evolution science is wrong, they say, and they're correct in that, but we really don't know how it works either. Well, there you are. It's a big letdown, okay, after all that. They're looking at a bush, but not the burning bush, okay? ID does not, what ID does, it does really well. It has essentially dismantled the neo-Darwinian fortress. It's leaving an opening for a fresh, new beginning with fresh, new ideas, like the ones you've heard today. Now, I didn't say I didn't like ID, did I? I didn't say intelligent design is wrong. I didn't say that the scientists were bad guys. They're not. I love ID. They just stop too soon. It's half a program. They say, this doesn't work to Darwin. And everybody says, well, what does? And they don't know. So there you go. Now, other scientists, I love these guys. They hedge. Okay? They talk a good line, but they're like fish. They swim up close to that spiritual edge, and then they turn away at the last minute to avoid being labeled religious. Yeah? Well, you can't blame them, because being religious can kill a career in science, unless you do it here, which is a blessing. So I've studied evolution and the problem of organic form for many, many years. I taught it for 10 years right here, okay? I love the concept, and I always knew that it was at least half right, as I said. But I knew that there must be more, something deeper at its core to guide this striving of nature towards complexity and form. Now, that was before I talked to Charlie Cole. You ever hear of him? Not here, but right over there in the Swedenborg Library, okay? On my first visit here, excuse me, it was in 1989. I'm getting emotional here. This is ridiculous. He told me, Charlie did, that Swedenborg's scientific works, I'm saying, were the key to the perennial problem of form, something I'd studied all my life. And he was right, and he showed me where to look. Now, 36 years later, I'm telling you the same thing. That was a long time ago. Science alone won't do it. And get this, spirituality alone can't do it either. What I've learned over these years is that good, honest science and good, rational, spiritual principles go together, and they will get the job done. Now, Swedenborg knew this all along. We've learned that today from some other speakers. Of course, he said it's beautiful to study science, but not of its own. It's got to come from somewhere else. Okay, now that was the moment that I knew the things that I already knew, call those memory knowledges, the things we learned and kind of put in the memory bank and stored away. That's when I knew that those things took on a radical new aspect. They looked different. The moment I saw that the bush was burning but was not consumed. So, thank you, Charlie. I've been a theistic scientist ever since. And this was the beginning of what would eventually become what I call intelligent default. Now, what is that? Well, think intelligent design, but with the how built right in, okay? Both halves, okay? See, Darwinism doesn't really work, but I'm going to tell you how it does. You see, that's my ambition to do that. Now, if natural selection isn't the mechanism for the emergence of forms, then what is? That's my quest, okay? Just like Ron had a quest. This is mine. The concept of intelligent default defines organic forms as default settings. Default, that's how you pronounce it if you're from the west of the Mississippi River. It's like insurance or insurance. Default or default. Okay, that's what it is. It's a default setting for matter in various configurations under various physical conditions. Human form and formative substance, Andy kept hammering on that. We've talked about that several times today, and so did Ian. Formative substance flows into this world from the spiritual world of uses, okay? And matter behaves according to set laws and physical restraints, producing natural forms of these uses. I'm going to read that little paragraph. It's key to what we're talking. And Andy, I'm going to quote the same verse you did. The concept of intelligent default defines organic forms as default settings for matter in its various configurations under various physical conditions. Human form flows into this world from the spiritual world as uses. That sounds weird at first, but we're going to keep going. And matter behaves according to set laws and physical restraints, producing natural forms of these uses. That sounds kind of Platonic, doesn't it? I think it is, really. Now, that's in your handout. That one quotation says it all. Now, what are we talking about? Laws, natural laws like gravity, bond angles, the speed of light, you name it. We got all kinds of natural laws that do not, well, we'll say they do not vary, okay, because we got to hang our hats on them. These natural laws and physical restraints are, it's going to sound like heresy, so hang on, they are the creator in essence, who is order itself accommodated to nature as pre-installed conditions of this world. How? Well, see your handout, TCR 52, one of my favorite passages. God is order, it says. And at creation, he introduced order into the universe and into all its parts. So it's not heresy. God's here. He is what? Well, one thing is order itself. He imparts that order himself into his creation, which is nature. Now, he's not that. That would be pantheism, but he imparted his order into it. It's like his fingerprint on creation, right there. That is extremely important. Now, uses. Now, that's a slippery concept. It's very essential. It's not what a spiritual thing is. It's what it does. It's what it is for, okay? That's your handout. I've got divine love and wisdom, Numbers 9 and 10. The form of love is a form of uses. The subject of love being uses. For love wishes to do goods, and goods are nothing more than uses, all right? Uses, now this is the good part, regarded in themselves are spiritual, while their forms are natural. What does that mean? Okay, here's an example. I thought about this on the way down here. I'm gonna give each one of you access to a beautiful machine shop. All kinds of machines. You name it, you got it. And I tell you one, I got a handful of things here, and they're nails. You don't know what they are, but I'm gonna tell you these are nails. And my problem is I wanna push these nails into this wood, but I'm too weak. I need something to help me. So go to your machine shop and design something that will help me do that. Come back next week. Okay, you all come back. What are you carrying? Hammers. But did they look alike? No. Your hammer's weird looking. It's round on one end, square on the other. His is long and skinny, but they're all hammers. Why? Because that's the use of the thing. I told you what I needed. You went and built a You wouldn't build a hammer like a pancake. That would be stupid. It would look like a hammer. Okay, that's what I mean by uses have forms. Now, uses are spiritual, but forms are natural. So they're going to take different forms depending on how they're derived. Okay, that's good. But we got to think about uses that way. What is critical to know is how this influx of spiritual uses actually comes into nature from the other side. I mean, really, we're talking about, the nexus here. This is the problem, the doorway between the two worlds. We've talked about this today, the hard problem, we call it, that stumps everyone. The interaction of spirit and nature, mind and brain, okay? It just stops everyone cold. Now, what is critical to know is how this actually works, okay? And here's what I found. Simply put, formative substance flows across this nexus at the lowest or innermost level of nature. Now, using Swedenborg's Principia, which I like very well as a guide, I envision a stepwise building up or compounding of pre-geometric particles into stable three-dimensional matter. Okay? This is facilitated by the orderly behavior imposed on these entities by what? The laws of nature. They're just doing what they have to do. It's default. Okay? As virtual particles, subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, macromolecules, then cells, tissues, organs, when all of these interact, they do so according to the same natural laws. Always these simple starting conditions compounding over time into emergent complexity and an infinite variety of forms. You'll find that in the Principia. Pretty neat. All right. And always the result, not of just random interactions, but a series of default outcomes facilitated by these same rules of order. Now, and the nexus, that meeting place itself, here we go. We find that in Swedenborg's Doctrine of Forms. You find it in the Fiber, 1742, numbers 261 through 273. That's my favorite book of his, the Fiber. It's the first one I ever read. There's a funny story about that, but I don't have time to tell you. The first book by Swedenborg I ever read was The Fiber. I bought it in Boston at this bookstore, and I thought it was one of his theological books. Well, it is. That's what this minister told me, no, don't read that. That's not his theology. And I said to the minister, have you read it? He said, no. I said, well, it is. That's the darndest thing. So anyway, it's my favorite book. All right, in it we find this cascade of forms. They're receptacles for divine consciousness as it descends from its source. Now, in the Principia, it's building up, right? This one is descending, coming down, all right? All the way down to non-living matter. Now, these are not particular finites like we see in the Principia. This series is ethereal on one end and material on the other, with intermediates all along the way, each answering the requirements of intervening levels of reality. And there are various levels of reality. There's a form to fit each one of those. Think about an escalator, sort of. Well, it's kind of that way. All right. It's in this series that spirit finally steps off, matter is born, and there is that very necessary separation of the two. It's perfect. Here is a structural model for spirit into nature, as never before described. And I believe that it also describes what is happening in the quantum world. The two are parallel, and to me, they correspond. Now, as I said, my book was about evolution. So here's how I saw some things. Well, first of all, and I wasn't the first to say it, natural selection just doesn't work like we think it does, like Charles Darwin thought it did. His vision of a slow, steady accumulation of tiny random mutations, bringing about the complexity and diversity of living nature, just doesn't work. That's been proved by these ID scientists, intelligent design people. They know this. Now, natural selection does some stuff, it's good stuff. It can fine-tune, it can sculpt, okay? And it can adapt an organism to slowly changing environmental conditions. which is marvelous in itself. It's a wonderful system. But whole new forms, it can sculpt a form to a better form. It can't get you a new form. That's the problem. Everybody's always known that. They just keep it under their hat, you know. There is randomness in nature, but there can be genetic mutations that refine existing forms so that they can adapt to changing conditions. I really believe that happens. This is natural selection called microevolution. It's a big deal. It helps existing forms adapt, but it doesn't make new forms. See, big mistakes, big mutations by different processes, that's called macroevolution, and that's where whole new forms would come from. But the best of the non-theistic scientists still cannot figure this one out. No, why? Because their bush is not a burning bush. They only see what they see with their natural eyes. Macroevolution. Nobody can figure it out. I can tell you how an organism can get better and better, and adapt to its environment, but they can't tell you how a new form would come into being. So, in my final analysis, I saw nature as a random event. I call it a popcorn popper of new forms. Random nature is always popping out new forms by accident. Accidents are good, okay? And each form looking for a use to link up with. Now, no use, no link, no correspondence. No correspondence, no lasting form. So the form disappears in nature. And most forms end up this way. And that was the kind of the premise of my book right there. Now finally, we're missing something. Swedenborg's doctrine of correspondence is the key to the whole thing. The most important of all, because this whole paradigm rests on this essential concept. Here, he gives a mechanism for spiritual natural interaction, strong enough to allow the divine to bring providence into nature, but forgiving enough to let nature take its course, to let nature do its thing. So correspondence is the dynamic link of natural forms with their spiritual counterparts. The doctrine of forms gives us the structural link. Correspondence is the dynamic link. Okay, but still, that irritating, hard problem. The how of the emergence of forms into nature. The how of spirit shaking hands with nature. It's a hard problem. So there I was. You'll see it if you read it at the end of the book. I liked it well enough. Got a pretty cover. I loved it. Okay, but I knew there's still something missing in the process. There was always this nagging, hard problem, still rearing its ugly head, and some questions that I had that I couldn't answer yet. First of all, how are these forms generated? How can they so readily come into correspondence with spiritual uses descending into nature? It just seemed to be, that just works. How? Finally, I recalled some beautiful memory knowledges, okay? Things I had learned 50 years ago, studying zoology, and discarded, just like everybody else did, in the frenzy of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. It was a concept that all of a sudden is beginning to look very promising in the light of the new science and the heavenly doctrine for the New Jerusalem. Now, what is this discarded theory that I dug out of the dustbin of the history of science? I couldn't believe it. It was there all the time, just waiting for me. First, some context. Okay? In Genesis, Adam was given the task of naming all the animals. Remember that? Bob Dylan wrote a song about it. It's really neat. Okay? He did that. This gave people the idea of kinds of things, kinds of animals, kinds of plants. And that idea of kinds entered into human consciousness. Lots of kinds. But this slowly emerged, and from this slowly emerged an image of what they call the great chain of being. All of these kinds seem to kind of go in a line, in a logical progression of organisms. Animals I'm thinking of at this point, but plants do the same. It's an ancient notion of the relatedness of the kinds in an ascending series of greater and greater complexity. It's an old idea. But this, of course, over time, led to speculation on how these organisms might be related. To some, it seemed like higher forms must have descended from pre-existing lower forms in an evolutionary way. For others, The Bible seems to imply what they call the fixity of species, established once and for all at creation. One and done. For at least a century, this fueled a great controversy. And finally, a theory for the 19th century offered both in a way, proposed by a guy named Richard Owen in England. He was born in 1804, died in 1892. The leading anatomist, the leading biologist, one of the hot shots of English science in his time. In his studies of comparative anatomy, he saw that the general features of animals seem to come in groups with different organisms showing the same features, identical features, but in their own way to suit their own particular needs. For example, my arm, a human arm, okay, I've got an upper arm bone, two bones here, a bunch of wrist bones, a bunch of hand bones. Okay, look at that. Okay, that's my arm. Now think of the horse's foreleg. That's not like my arm, is it? Yes, it is. One bone, two bones, wrist bones, and horses are funny. They're walking around on that finger right there. But it's the same stuff, adapted to the horse's use. Wow. Think about a frog's front leg. Yeah? Ooh, same thing, except it's froggy, not human-y or horsey. And of course, Richard Owen made much of that. And then think of fish's pectoral fins, for instance. Real fishy, but you look at the bones involved, they're the same. And on and on and on. You can just go forever. In fact, I have gone forever. That's called comparative anatomy. I taught that for 10 years right down, I think it was in room 8 or something. Anyway, it's a wonderful concept. So, Owen called that homology. He wasn't the only one. Homology, they called that. Cuvier, the famous French anatomist, called that the same. And he called these anatomical groups, and this is where I have to thank Angela over and over for setting the stage for this lecture, because I didn't have time to explain this, and she did. He called it, dun, 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 archetypes. Sound familiar? Now, it wasn't an original idea with him. I think he must have stolen it from Goethe, probably. Anyway, he called them archetypes. And he said that these patterns somehow pre-existed the emergence of animals in the world. Somehow. He was pretty vague about that. This had obvious metaphysical implications. They didn't make much of that either. Okay? So here was a kind of fixity for people to grab to. The fixity guys would be happy with this, but he also thought that there must be some evolutionary process producing all this adaptation from a single archetype. He didn't really elaborate on this either, but he made the evolution guys happy. So everybody was kind of happy with this, with great, wonderful theory. And it prevailed for quite a while. It was powerful, let's say. And it was powerful because it was based on observation. It was open to the theistic necessities of fixity, but it also opened the possibility of dynamic process, evolution by any other name. Then along came an evolutionary guy named Darwin. We all know and love him. He ignored Owen's archetype theory, and he proposed his own theory of a blind, completely random process for the emergence of forms by what he called natural selection. Now, this is interesting about this book called The Origin of Species. His reasoning is kind of weak, really, to get right down to it. And in the absence of any notion of genetics, no one knew about genetics. He was guessing at how inheritance really worked. And this is funny. Initially, his theory was not well received at all. It was criticized heavily by the scientists who knew their stuff. And for the first few years, it was just crickets for old Darwin. We don't know that because that's not what we're taught. We're taught that he wrote this book and everybody just climbed on, and from that point forward, it was evolution. So, then along came a guy named Thomas Huxley, very eminent scientist in Britain at the same time, zoologist. Now here comes the human part of the story. You'll know that some things never change, especially in academia. Huxley was an eminent professional rival to Owen. Okay? Now Owen was a mean and nasty kind of guy. Nobody liked him. They were all afraid of him because he was smarter than everybody, and he had this powerful presence They didn't like him. Guess what? So was Huxley. Mean and nasty kind of guy. They called him Darwin's bulldog. He was horrible. So a great battle of ill will, character assassination, and propaganda ensued between these two mean and nasty guys, and it went on for a long time. Huxley won. Somebody had to win. He won. He was meaner and nastier. Plus, at this point, Owen was old and frail, and Huxley just overpowered him. He managed, Huxley, to sell Darwin's theory to the world and discredit Owen in the bargain. He must have been quite happy about that. So Darwin's theory prevailed, and the perfectly valid theory of archetypes was buried in the history of science forever. But not for me, because I always liked this theory of archetypes. Even before I knew much about theistic anything, it just resonated with me. You know how things will do. Ideas just, they plant a seed in your mind and it never goes away. Now, a little more context. Multicellular organisms made their appearance during what has been called the Cambrian explosion. The rapid, the rapid diversification of life during the Cambrian geological period, we're told 500 million years ago. There's this period of time, which is really kind of like a blink in the geological record, and appear all these multicellular organisms all of a sudden. Boom, just like that, out of nowhere. Now, here's the good part. There are 6 general body plans that have been in place since that Cambrian explosion. Now, they've been improved on, and but there are 6. Guess what? No new ones since. No. Is that crazy or what? Now, what appears is just variations on these themes for billions of years. What are these? Well, they're not what you might expect. I'm going to list them off, but I'm not going to riff off into a lecture. I could talk for 2 days about these things. First of all, tissues. What are those? Groups of cells in association which do a common thing. They do all work together. A tissue, like liver tissue. That's all liver cells. All right. They make their appearance in the Cambrian explosion. What else? Symmetry. 2 kinds, bilateral and radial. Now, as a mammal, I'm bilaterally symmetrical. I got a midline, I got a left and a right. And then radial symmetry is circular, as we see in starfish and the Coelenterata and jellyfish. And there's radial, and they're divided into 5 segments. Very interesting. Here's what's really interesting. Look at my hand. Wow. I'm not a starfish, but there's a little something going on there. I've got 2 kinds of symmetry here. I would show you my feet, but you don't want to see that. It's the same, 5, just like that. So, another good one, segmentation. Segmentation appears in certain organisms, and it's never left from that point forward. Think of annelid worms. They're a perfectly good example of a segmented worm. Well, you have repeated series of similar divisions. But we're not segmented, right? Yeah, we are. You ever see a spinal column? You're an orthopedist, what do you call those? Segments. They are segments. And to each in the thoracic cavity, there's a rib attached. We call those segments. We are segmented, but in mammals, we've changed so much that you can't tell it. But we're segmented, just like an annelid worm. What else? Oral and aboral orientation. It seems like a no-brainer. An animal has a front end and a back end. Okay, an oral for intake and a aboral for you know what. So there you go. And that's been that way ever since. Finally, I kind of added this one. Arborization, branching to increase surface area. I won't go on. I could get lost in arborization. You know that often. 6 things. They're there, they never leave, and there are really no new forms in the world. These are archetypes, you see. Now, Owen didn't know about these at all, but we do. And just as Owen said, homologous anatomical structures follow archetypes too. He was kind of vague about their origin, but to me, this ill-defined notion of their pre-existence points directly at Swedenborg's description of how formative substance works, flowing into natural forms as manifestations of the human form, divine. Think about it. In my book, I left off with natural forms being generated by random physical forces. Okay, but how do these so neatly line up with spiritual uses flowing in? All right, remember, it's uses that flow in. It just seemed too loosey-goosey, but that was the end of that. So what if some natural forms were already primed to harmonize with these spiritual stereotypes, archetypes? Now we're getting some. What if these natural forms are kind of already primed up to meet something coming from here? Oh, then now we're talking. Look at that. Am I inspired or what? All right. All right, so divinum humanum, divine human form. Flowing in not as shapes. You can't think about shapes. You can't think about structures. It flows in as uses. It's a new idea. They flow in as ideas. How every part and organ of this human form lives and moves and has its being. Every bit in both worlds. Think image of God here. We're talking about that. True image. Whatever, this is in your handout, whatever proceeds from God partakes of the human form. Whatever it says. Because God is himself the universal human. All forms in nature were produced by nature. Yes, they are produced by nature, but according to the several archetypes that guide their production. Where and how are these natural forms formed? Forged. I constantly return to Swedenborg's doctrine of forms for an image of this continuous process. And in this metaphysical process, I see correspondence to what is constantly going on at the lowest level of reality we call the quantum world. It's a process moving up this time, not down. Virtual particles coming in from somewhere else, combining and recombining to form subatomic particles, combining and recombining to form atoms, and then molecules, and then macromolecules, then cells, then tissues, then organs, and then all the forms in the world, proceeding from God, because God is himself the universal human. So I see one system coming down, there's the nexus, one system coming up. So that's where I am at this point. I'm getting ready to write it again. But there's more, and there's a lot more. Okay? I have to learn a lot more before I can put this all together for a second try, but I'm working on it. That's why I'm letting you in on it. It won't be too long. Stay tuned. I think I'm getting close. The infusion of this once discredited idea of archetypes sends my research in a new and hopeful direction, as it harmonizes very nicely with the spiritual reality found in the scientific and theological writings, and with what Owen saw and what we see in the natural world all around us. As I said above, good, honest science and good, rational spiritual principles together can get this job done. That's theistic science. What a wonderful time to be a theistic scientist. So wish me luck.